welcome to our final session of the week on hashtag LDeduchat, Leadership Development in Education. First of all, I just want to thank all of you that have actually responded to the mailing list form that I put out there. The comments have been absolutely phenomenal, and I'm so glad that we seem to be hitting the right tone for you regarding CPD during this lockdown period that we're in. And obviously we're moving forward into new phases of whatever the new normal looks like. We've got some exciting announcements in terms of what we have on offer for you, which we'll be announcing on Twitter and everywhere else over the next week. Do hit subscribe. We've still got sessions coming up in this series, and then moving forward, we've got a lot more to come. And all of it is free for you to develop yourselves when schools perhaps don't have the same priorities at the moment as we are focusing on our students at the moment. On Twitter today, we have Marion Porter, who has been, I think, near enough in every single session as an attendee. And on Twitter, Marion Porter is doing our Twitter takeover of @Chiltern TSA. Make sure you go on there if you are on Twitter. And I know just looking at the feedback form, 2/3 of you are on Twitter. Do jump on there and subscribe with us, or follow us, should I say, and engage with us online as well. So today's session, Joe Richardson, who is the strategic leader for St Thomas's Catholic Academies Trust. The session is about school improvement, but it's really trying to pull out the gems, the silver linings out of lockdown, out of this situation that we're in, but also just in general, what are the key things that we perhaps need to consider when we're looking at school improvement, the cultures that we are trying to embed, and the ethos that we want to have as an organisation. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into his video, and do share your thoughts. I'll see you soon.
So, thank you very much indeed for this opportunity to be part of this amazing programme that has really mushroomed over the course of the last few weeks and months. I'm not going to tell a lie. When I agreed to do this a few weeks and months ago, Sufjan contacted me and said, well, am I being part of the programme? At that point, I was aware that it would just be a few people. It's now a lot of people, and I'm very conscious of the people who've gone before me. So look, I'm going to do my best here today, but feeling a little bit intimidated by the quality of all those people that have gone before me. And on that quality, let me just say that if you are looking today for something to do with school improvement about the specifics of, say, curriculum or teaching in the curriculum, behaviour, aspects of leadership, then you won't go too far wrong to look back at the sessions that Stuart did, Tom did, Sam Strickland did on behaviour, or indeed to engage with anything about everything that Catherine has done over the course of the last few years. She's an absolute titan of the education world, is she not? My focus, in fact, will be slightly different to that. My focus will be around the nature of school improvement, how you bring that about, the things that lie behind maybe the big ticket items of curriculum and behaviour and so on and so forth. Just a little bit about my background. So I've had 3 substantive head teacher posts spanning a period of 10 years. And in those 10 years, they were sort of divided up into 2 chunks, really. The first chunk was when I was appointed as head teacher of St Thomas More School in Bedford. Now, within a term, the school had gained outstanding status. Clearly, nothing to do with me in any way, shape, or form. I was just hung around in the goal box like Gary Lineker, waiting to nod the ball into the net. But it was all to do with a brilliant team and the great work they did. As part of my work at St Thomas More, and as it went on to become a teaching school and a national support school, we supported Thomas Becket School in Northampton for a year, and that support looked like me going to Thomas Becket for a year. Thomas Becket was in a really difficult place at that point in time. It's not there anymore, but it was a really interesting, challenging, rewarding year, helping a school that was in a very difficult place, and I learned a lot about school improvement from my time in that school. I also learned, crucially, that in the most challenging schools, you sometimes find the very best people. I then kind of returned, really, to a little bit of my spiritual home, because I've spent 6 years as a deputy head teacher at Cardinal Newman, went away and learnt my craft elsewhere as a head teacher, and came back and tried to make as few mistakes as I possibly could. But what I really learnt through those 3 different experiences is that school improvement looks very different according to where you are. I'm from a farming background in some ways. I'm from the depths of Wiltshire. And one of the things I know is plants just don't grow anywhere. Different fields are useful for different types of crops, depending on the soil type, depending on what's there. And you can try and plonk a curriculum into a particular school and hope that it will work, or behaviour system, or style of teaching and so on. But if you haven't worked on the soil first, if you haven't improved what's there, the beliefs, the culture, the things that are going to allow the growth to happen, then all of your efforts are going to fall a little bit on stony ground. What we did at Cardinal Newman would not have been appropriate for Thomas Becket. What we did at Thomas Becket would not have been appropriate for St Thomas More, because they are all at different stages and different phases and required different imperatives to move on to the next stage. So it's not a straightforward answer. What are the priorities in terms of school improvement? The answer actually is you need to find out what the priorities are. That's, we could stop here, couldn't we, really? But what I'm going to do is hopefully illustrate with help and support of two great people the kind of things you might do. So we're going to look at 5 things, and then there's a little bit of a bonus extra. I hope Arv's going to put that into the online version at a later point in time. We'll look at service and stewardship and legacy. We'll look at purpose. We'll look at how you identify and remove some obstacles. We'll look at how you build on strengths, because both of those things need to happen if you're going to deliver school improvement. And we'll also look at the principle of letting leaders lead and why that might be uncomfortable for anyone watching today. And about people watching today, so I'm aware that there could well be heads of department, heads of year, team leaders, deputy head teachers, assistant head teachers, even CEOs watching this possibly. And I think this applies to all of us equally in terms of the work that we might seek to do over a period of time. So as I talk, just apply things to your own context and to your own lens. And about your own context and your own lens, I can't do anything about school improvement without seeing it through the lens of what I believe in as a person. And you can see there, I'm a CEO, a strategic executive leader of a Catholic Academy trust, and I've only ever worked in Catholic schools. My dad was a Catholic head teacher. It's kind of in the blood a little bit. So when I talk about things that connect to my faith and those anchor points, what I'm going to challenge you to do, if you're not from that faith tradition or you're from no particular faith tradition, is just to ask yourself, what goes there for me? What do I put in there? How do I anchor the things that I'm doing and the things that my community is doing as well? Let's start off with that first point: service, stewardship, legacy. In that great book by James Kerr, he talks about the history of the All Blacks and how in recent years they've done a great job of kind of keeping themselves great, reinventing themselves to a certain extent through their traditions and through their histories. And one thing I absolutely adore: if you have the privilege to be to win a cap as a New Zealand All Black rugby player, then you're given a little book apparently. And in that little book, it's got every page of that book is a shirt going back through the, say, 100 years history of the New Zealand All Blacks. So the first page is the first ever shirt, a picture of the first ever shirt that was worn by New Zealand All Blacks. And the last page is the most modern shirt that's worn by New Zealand All Black players. And it will be one of those impossibly tight shirts that no one of my generation or physique should dare approach and attempt to wear, although some do. What the message is behind that little book is that while you are great in the position that you have at the moment, while you are a great head of department, a great head teacher, a great CEO, actually you're just wearing the shirt for now. It's not ours to keep. And the challenge is to leave the shirt in a better place than which you found it when you first started out. That's a huge challenge. So even before you start on your mission of school improvement, just be clear, your ultimate goal is not necessarily school improvement itself, although that will be a natural consequence. It's about legacy. When you walk out of the building, what's left behind? And to that end, you need to recognise that actually you as a leader, me as a leader, and all the other leaders in our institution are there, and they are people with gifts that they bring to what they do. There's that lovely passage there from St. Peter. Each of us has received a gift. Use it to serve one another. That's interesting, isn't it? Serve one another. So making people better around you, encouraging them to take on leadership perhaps, so that you can drive things forward and really act as a steward of your community. There's a beautiful image there which is an illustration of Jesus on the road to Emmaus. And the story goes essentially that Jesus has already died, and two disciples are walking along the road to Emmaus, and they're kind of fretting. They're all full of anxiety and nervousness and confusion, unsure about what they're to do. And Jesus appears to them, beside them on the road to Emmaus, and he talks with them and he walks with them. And they don't realise who he is for a long period of time. But as he speaks to them, they're filled with inspiration. They're filled with courage. They're filled with a desire to go out and do good. And later on in the story, Jesus reveals who he is to them, and and their hearts are just burning with passion, burning with desire to go and do good. Now, look, none of us should have a Messiah complex ever, really, but it does really give us an indication about what our work is about. It is not about us. It really isn't. We should be able to walk away from that school improvement journey at the end, and the legacy be so strong that actually it can sustain going on into the future. That's the big challenge. And if you're going to leave a legacy, you really need to have a very clear purpose. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, because they say that great leaders tell stories. Well, I'm not a great leader, but I will try and tell a story. But if you're going to have a purpose, for your own institution, it needs to connect very clearly to your mission statement, that why of your organisation. So I've got that quote there from our own trust: the glory of God as a human being fully alive. What does fully alive actually mean? Well, it means two things, really. One, it means that they are children in our trust and children in our schools are hugely successful in all they do. No shyness about that. We should be fiercely ambitious for children to succeed. The second thing about being fully alive is it must include all of you. Yes, obviously the academic side of it, because schools are there to deliver that. But it is about the spiritual. It is about the emotional. It is about the cultural. It is about the moral and all those aspects of development that we have. We all know children, do we not, and staff actually, who for whom the single purpose of coming to school almost is the drama performance that comes on 3 times a year in many schools. And they can almost tolerate the rest of it because they have this brilliant part that makes them fully alive. So our schools must be places of great purpose and an absolute clarity. And I do find that, connecting your school community with good stories is a really important part of what we do. So his stories about two children that I'd like to share with you. They kind of exemplify what we're about. The first is a little lad, I'm going to call him James to protect his identity. So James came to Cardinal Newman a few years ago, and he came to the school having been really badly bullied at his previous school. He has a very poor skin complaint. James came to school and he wanted to come to school. He wanted to have some friends. He wanted to go and play football at lunchtime. He wanted to go to lessons, and he wanted to do really well in his lessons. 5 things. James did all 5 things from about day 2 of being in the school. He's much loved. He's fully alive. And when you think about that mission statement, it's not as simple as saying, is the maths great? Is the English great? Children have to be fully alive. And we know we've been successful because an inspector spoke to this little lad. And, I find this hard to say because it's quite an emotional thing, the thing he said. When they asked him, what's it like to be at Cardinal Newman? And they were trying to dig around bullying and things like that. He said, and bear in mind, he had a lad there with a really difficult skin condition. He said to the inspector, Cardinal Newman is a place where you can be comfortable in your own skin. I mean, crikey, it's really profound, isn't it? I want to tell you about someone else as well. I want to tell you about Rosie. Rosie is a little girl with Down syndrome and went to Cardinal Newman a few years ago when we were still in A-star to G territory. Rosie was loved into achieving 5 A-star to G grades, and I really mean loved. And it was tough love as well, because do you know what? I am 100% sure that in most schools in the country, Rosie would not have been entered for 5 GCSEs. She really wouldn't. People have made the decision a while back, actually, no, it's too challenging for Rosie to do that. We must find things that Rosie can do, and we did. She got 5 qualifications, right? So she did other things as well. She didn't get 11 GCSEs or 10 GCSEs, she got 5, but she got 5 GCSEs. And what I love about that is that little girl she enriched our lives so much, but she also was enriched by the fierce determination we had to set the bar high. And we'll set that bar high in line with that purpose, in line with drawing out the gifts to those people, not just for Rosie, but for the people who are going to go on and become doctors, for the people who are going to go on and become engineers, for the people who are going to go on and, and become teachers and leaders of the future as well. We've got to set the bar high. Now, the thing I'm sharing with you about this now is that you've got to develop your stories and you've got to develop your connections to really bring your purpose alive. So think about that. Think about how you can bring your purpose alive in your community. I'm going to ask Kieran Stapleton to take up the story from here a little bit. Kieran is head teacher of St. Joseph's Catholic School in Slough and has transformed that school from being a really poor school to being an outstanding Catholic school in everything that possibly means. And what Kieran has done is, yes, he's built on strengths, and Joe Miles is going to talk about that in a minute or two as well. But he has also been quite relentless about removing the barriers. And, some of those barriers can be cultural, they can be, poor processes and things like that. But they are always exemplified in the narrative that you find in your school. So when you're in your school or in your team or in your department, just listen to the things that people are saying. If you regularly are getting things like, we tried that, or that's going to put pressure on the 1265, or, we don't do it that way, things like that, you've got a job to do to improve the environment in the people, connect people to their hearts, go back to the purpose before you can even bother achieving with anything else. Crucially, if you've got in your senior team people saying things like, results don't matter, it's all about other things, well, you've got a real problem, and you need to address that head on and challenge that narrative with your examples of Rosie and other people as well, because results really do matter. Because I've never been, as a secondary head teacher, handing out brown envelopes on results day. I've seen the joy in people's faces, and I've seen the bitter disappointment in people's eyes when they thought they were going to do really well and they might have been let down by poor teaching in one department or another. We've all seen that as leaders, right? I'm not unique in that scenario, and it should really chasten us and make us think it. So if you ever have someone saying results don't matter, challenge it head on. Here's the great news. In some schools where problems seem huge, and they may well be huge, and they're really stuck and possibly even inadequate schools, it can look like it's going to take forever to turn things around. That's not my experience. So when I went to Thomas Beckett's for just a year, we absolutely transformed the outcomes for those young people in that single year. It's to my great regret that in some ways I didn't stay there and carry on with the work, because I think that's all about legacy, and what I left behind wasn't as strong as what we did in that year in its own right. So I learned a lot there by my own mistakes. But you know what? What I did learn is that you can get some serious momentum really quickly. And so in that image there where you've got that big boulder, just imagine that boulder being released from that position and the water flowing and cascading through, and you get the metaphor, right? It's all about that free flow and things moving efficiently. But the great thing is that boulder doesn't just move, it tumbles on downstream and it clears out loads of other nonsense procedures and protocols and cultures and people who say, I can't do this, I won't do that. Kids in this school can't achieve that. We've all heard that at some point. That boulder, once you shift it, it gets momentum. And that's why you see in schools like Kieran's and schools like Joe's, where you've got a cultural momentum of improvement. And it's just a joy to behold. So let Joe and Kieran pick up the story from there.
Hello, my name is Jo Miles and I'm head teacher at Chorley High School for Girls in Luton. Chorley High School for Girls was graded Ofsted Outstanding in January 2020. We were one of the first schools to be graded Ofsted Outstanding under the new framework introduced in September 2019. But perhaps most significantly, the Ofsted Outstanding grading judgment came after two previous judgments in 2013 and 2015 where the school was judged to be requires improvement. Therefore, our outstanding judgment in January 2020 gives us enormous pride. I took up post at the school in September 2017, but of course had visited the school beforehand. The image on the screen here of the mud maiden in the lost gardens of Heligan really sums up for me what I felt about the school after my visit. I felt the school was a sleeping giant. I was absolutely convinced after my visit that the school could and should be outstanding. I met students and I met staff, and the moment that really confirmed this for me was when I met Year 10 students in the English Heart Space when they were discussing Macbeth. They were articulate, they were full of conviction and passion about their learning, and I came away absolutely certain that the school had enormous potential, and not only that, there were strengths at the school that had not yet been recognised outside of the school. There's quite a lot of talk about transforming schools, and I'm not so sure that this is really the best way to think about school improvement. I think a better way is to think about looking back and looking forward. And I often use this visual that's on the screen in front of you. I've also been really inspired by some of the reading that I've done. And there's a great book on sustainable leadership by Andy Hargreaves and Dean Fink. And one of the principles that they talk about is about sustainable leadership, which has a respect for the past and which builds on that into the future. So when I got to Chorley High School for Girls, there were lots of strengths and some enormous strengths. There was a really strong pastoral system that ensured that the girls were well cared for both academically and socially. There were really strong processes in place in terms of data and in terms of monitoring. And there was a good framework for teaching and learning in place, which gave a shared understanding across all of the staff. And therefore, the work moving forward was to build on all of that and to build on the strengths, rather than seeing things as a break in history. More importantly, we need to look back in order to move forward. Having worked in an outstanding school for a number of years before I came to Chorley High School for Girls, I knew that one of the key things that outstanding schools do is to look outwards for inspiration, to look outwards to support, and to look outwards to share their own practice. So one of the things that we did was to become involved in Challenge Partners, which was a peer-to-peer review. And we did 2 reviews, one in 2018 and one in 2019. And this gave staff the opportunity to discuss pedagogy with people from other schools and to do co-observations and to discuss the process of teaching and learning. In 2018, one of our assistant head teachers organised a Chorley Away Day, which gave all teaching staff and teaching assistants the opportunity to go to another school on a theme that suited their professional development for their subject, and therefore gave them that opportunity to get some inspiration and to discuss teaching and learning with people not from their own school and bring back ideas and resources back to Chorley High School for Girls. Another area of important work for us at the school was strengthening community. We did this in 2 ways. First of all, we revamped some of our communications, including a new style newsletter, which was designed by a group of teachers and support staff. And the newly vamped newsletter was called Chorley Chronicle, Where Community Matters, featuring lots of stories about the school's successes and student learning. This was in response to feedback from parents when I first arrived at the school, who said they wanted to know more about the work of the school and for the work of the school to be celebrated in the local community. Another area of strengthening community was the introduction in September 2018 of a new house system. The house system was designed by all of the school community, by teachers and by students. Students chose the names of the 4 houses named after influential women. And in September 2018, it was launched through a series of activities with staff and with students. This has meant that students have had access to more leadership opportunities. And for teachers, it's a different way of coming together through healthy competition and house assemblies. All of our work at Chorley High School for Girls has carefully built on what has gone before. And I'm reminded often of Alex Ferguson's mantra when he arrived at Manchester United, and it was to watch and listen. And this enabled him to carefully build on what had gone before. I do believe that sustainable change in any school, in any organisation, needs to be built on a careful consideration of what has gone before. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Kieran Stapleton. I'm currently the head teacher at St Joseph's Catholic High School in Slough, and I've been very privileged to be involved in a number of opportunities around school improvement over the last few years. If I was asked to see sort of what my insight might be around that, I think I would say that you can usually tell if schools are going badly or if they're underperforming, or probably more importantly, if they're about to start underperforming. If you'll start to hear words and language, or you'll start to see behavioural traits which suggests that the school is now serving the needs of the staff rather than the needs of the children, and where you start to see that, that's an issue which has got to do with the culture of the school and will need challenging pretty quickly. Now, there's a lot of psychological research about what people do and why they do what they do, and I think there's three probably more important factors that come straight down to that. The first, which is worth examining and looking at, is the principle of mastery. People want to be better, essentially, at what they do and why they do what they do. That's why you get CEOs who then decide to put a lot of money into learning how to cook or learn how to play musical instruments. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the job that they do or the job that they're paid for. They just simply want to do better at whatever it is that they really enjoy. So make sure that you have good feedback loops that will help people be better at what they do. Always be wary, I'd say, of people who come to ask you about pay negotiations before you've actually employed them or before they've been asked to do what they do. Just got to ask yourself, why is it that they really want to work at your establishment? Secondly, there's the principle of autonomy. We all want to be responsible for what we want to do, and we all want to own what we want to do. And there's nothing better than when something is successful for a staff member to turn around and say, you know what, I did that. But you can't do that, and they can't say that unless you've given them some autonomy in what they're doing, and you've given them ownership in what they're doing, and you've given them the ability to make a decision. Schools go wrong pretty quickly if there's no decision-making processes anywhere down the school other than with you. And things that will go wrong in the classroom will very end up at your desk if people aren't allowed to be able to make decisions. For that, they've got to have autonomy. But perhaps of all of those, the most important is having a really clear sense of purpose. Schools go wrong really quickly where there's a disconnection between what they do and why they do what they do. Things go wrong in sense of banking systems where people forget what banks are for, where things serve people's own needs rather than anything else. So some really key, clear questions which need to be considered around the sense of purpose, which will reconnect you back to the values of which you serve. What is it that you stand for as a school? Why do you do what you do? What is it for the sake of that you make decisions and do things? And perhaps what is it that is of the ultimate concern that the staff do? What is it that you're unconditionally committed to? Get that sense of purpose right, and underlying that will be a sense of values which will guide and direct and move the school in the right direction. That's it. Thank you very much.
I just want to pick up one thing that Kieran didn't mention in his little piece there, but I think is really important. I went into a school a little while ago and spoke to a supply teacher. The supply teacher had left a while ago and just came back every now and again to do a bit of supply and support the school, where they're short-staffed. And I said to them, I said, what's changed in the school? You've been here in dark times and good. What's changed about the school? And he quoted that phrase there you can see on the screen there from Don Bosco that Kieran uses with his staff, the purpose, going back to the purpose. All the staff know that in St. Joseph's, it is not enough for children to be loved. They must know they are loved. Just think about what that means, the absolute connection. John Henry Newman talks about heart speaks unto heart. Our heart as leaders speaks to our staff's heart. Our heart as teachers speaks to the children's heart. Heart speaks unto heart. It's deeper, it's so much more profound than what's your Progress 8. But I tell you what, your Progress 8, your Key Stage 2 scores, your A-level outcomes, they'll be banging all day long if heart speaks unto heart. So just something very quick on identifying your leaders and passing the ball, as the slide says there. Once you've identified all your school priorities, the main job of a leader is surely to match up the right people with the right jobs. And that's quite a straightforward thing to do, actually. What is much more complex is what is articulated in that great book there by James Kerr. It's the idea of pass the ball. Now, as leaders, I think most of us tend to be a little bit control freaky, right? I'm sure that's true of me. And my biggest mistakes over the years have absolutely been when I have given someone a job to do, kind of passed the ball to them, and then taken the ball back off them at different points, then given it back to them again, and to and fro. And actually, that's no way to do anything really. You've got to be positive and confident in what you're doing. You've got to give the ball to the next person and let them get on with what they've got to do. So giving the ball to your deputy head teachers, to your heads of department, or from your heads of department to a team leader, or even to an NQT actually, who's showing great skills in a different aspect. Give them the ball, let them get on with it, and let them do their job. If they don't do a great job with it, then it's your fault because you gave them the wrong job to do. You didn't match up their skill sets with the things that they're capable of doing. And hey, we've all been there, right? The other thing as leaders we have to be really conscious of is that most people don't do things in the way that we want them to be done if we're letting them genuinely lead. So I love that picture there of the pathway going across the park there to a destination, and it's a shorter pathway, and it's now a quite well-established path. But you can see from the tarmac pavement that's beside it where the designers, the planners, wanted people to go. And as head teachers, as heads of department, or as CEOs, you may have a clear view as to how you want something done, the direction of travel, and be clear about that. What you've probably done actually is you've articulated the destination, and that's really all we should do as leaders quite often is, yeah, this is where I want us to get to. How people get there is entirely up to them to a certain extent, within the bounds of reasonableness. So what I love about that image there is it illustrates that not just someone has trodden a new path, but lots of people have followed them and have even overcome the hurdle and barriers that might have been there at the beginning to be able to follow that path. So 2 messages there. 1, pass the ball. Let people get on with the job they've got to do. 2, let them do it their way. It may be different to yours, but if their desire line and the destination is accurate, then what's the problem? Just let them get on with it. So there you go. My priorities for school improvement. Start with legacy. Be clear that you're going to be gone in a while. You'll be onto a different role, a different school. It's what you leave behind that matters. If it crumbles away afterwards, you didn't do a good enough job. And do you know what? I've done that before. Clear about your purpose. Connect people to the why of your organisation before you think about changing the curriculum, before you think about changing anything else. You need to be clear about that so that you can challenge some of the cultural orthodoxies that may have developed that aren't so good and you're not comfortable with. Build on strength. If at all humanly possible, just go around in the first couple of weeks or whatever role you're in and just celebrate all the things about your organisation is great. It will give you some credibility when you then go around and have to say, okay, I said XYZ was great 3 weeks ago. I've just been looking a bit deeper. I'm a bit worried about this. And then have the conversation. Listen very carefully, though, throughout that. And finally, let those leaders lead. Pass the ball. If they're going to do it in a different way, and it's not your way, let them do it anyway. Same destination, and they're happy with it, let them do it. Let that pathway develop. I never do any kind of presentation without leaving a final reflection. I've used this reflection from Marianne Williamson in every role that I've ever been in and in every school that I've ever been in, because it speaks so much what I believe about the children that we serve and the staff that we serve and the people that we all are. Now, as I said before, many people watching today will not be people of faith or Christian faith or any particular faith for that matter. Think about your own reflections. Think about what you would insert there in its place. But from me to you, this is my offering to you, because I think it says a lot about who we are and what we are. Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. I hope that's been useful. Right, so here's the bonus bits. And when I say bonus, I'm not too sure they're bonus bits. A couple of toolkits that might be a bit helpful to people as they think through the things they want to do. There's a relationship, right, in all schools, before you get there, about the appetite for change and the tolerance of risk. And you need to understand your organisation to really be able to be sure that whatever you're going to do is going to take root and be effective. If you scatter seeds wildly all around your organisation, different new things that are going to be going on, and people are just so battle weary of change, it's not going to work. You're going to have to do a lot of work on your purpose first before you can even begin to address the behaviour issues or the curriculum issues, because your changes aren't going to take root. It doesn't take long to do this, by the way. It doesn't take long to look at your culture and to really reconnect people, but it does take a little bit of skill, I think, in reality. And the framework I've got there, those 4 quadrants there, they're not anything that I would say that I've done overtly with my teams at any point in time, but they've always been conscious in my mind, but they could be used in a particular setting. I think if I went back to my role at Thomas Becket, I would use this actually again, just to try and really understand exactly where people were at emotionally before I started trying to change things. But I was younger and naive and stupid, really. So look, here those 4 quadrants. So in the bottom quadrant there, you've got low change appetite, low risk tolerance. This is a school that is frightened of its own shadow, really and truly. Battle weary, maybe the changes have happened, maybe lots of changes of leadership are going on, and people are just fed up to the back teeth of what's going on. But they're also scared, right? Because things around them aren't going well. They're scared to challenge the leadership team maybe when they're not feeling very well supported, because they think it will bite back at them, and their job will be under threat, all sorts of different things. But you're not going to change anything in that school until you pick people's heads up and get them looking at the horizon. Pick people's heads up and encourage them to talk, and then listen, really listen. Give them a voice again. Really important. That top left-hand box, high change appetite, low risk tolerance. We've all been in these organisations. I've certainly been, I've been a head of department where everyone's going, yeah, change, let's go for it. It's going to be great. And then you change things and you'll go and check it 3 weeks later, and people are suddenly doing the thing they were doing before. And you're like, well, what's going on there? They say, I found it wasn't working for me. Well, let me tell you about the nature of change. You start with loads of energy and things go great for about 3 days. And then people start to find the problems in the system, and people's faith in it wanes down a little bit. And then you persevere and sort those out, and it picks back up to a level that is, higher than what you were at before. Change is not some kind of linear increment like that. Change wobbles around a little bit, and you have to be comfortable with that and recognize that. The bottom right quadrant is a nightmare, a real nightmare. So this is an environment where people do not want to change, really, really reluctant to change, all sorts of barriers put in the way of the leadership teams and anyone, and governors and all sorts of people to actually get change going. And actually, it could be in a failing environment, and people are quite happy for that to go on. People are saying, nah, I'm not changing anything. It's all the leadership team's fault. It's all, it's never all of our fault, is it? My fault included, the whole school's fault. It's got to be somebody else's fault. And in that environment, you have a really high tolerance of risk, because people are content not to change anything and let the school fail. That really is uncomfortable. And this is the one time I'll say this. It's one of those occasions where you got to change the people on the bus. Not all of them, because loads of them will be great, right? And Joe talked about that. But some of the people on the bus, you're going to have to change them. Top right, well, that's an exciting place to be, but it's also a dangerous place to be in some way, shape or form. So, loads of appetite for change and a high risk tolerance. The danger with that slightly is that you just go from initiative to initiative to initiative, and people are always excited by the new thing, but never bed in the things that really matter. So what I would suggest to you is that you find some people in your school and you make them your completer finishers. So I'm thinking about people like Michelle Chappell that I worked with, like Lucy Whelan, who I worked with, who are just astonishingly brilliant people and are fierce completer finishers. Find those people and make sure that they are the people who have the authority to challenge you and other leaders to say, hey, let's just get this bit finished first before we move on to the next thing. You need those people in your organisation. And the second one is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's genuine, actually. I think you can identify school priorities in 10 days. I'll be honest with you, if you can't really find out what you need to do as a school until you've walked the corridors for a period of time. And I just say that with the experience I've got as deputy head and as head teacher as well. I really don't believe you can just look at an ISDR or a data sheet or student outcomes and say, I know what this school needs. You can make a list of things you think they need, but you need to dig deeper than the data to find out why is that the way that it is. So here's the slightly tongue-in-cheek way of doing things. First of all, get your leadership team and other people in your school to identify what their strengths are. All this, not personally, but the strengths of the organisation, the things in the school that are going really, really well. And then spend 10 days going around the school, celebrating all the things that are indeed great. So tick off those things that are great. But those things that people think are great, but are not great, make a separate list of those things. And then organise those things together with other challenging things that you find into that table you can see there in front of you. And it's, as I say, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but on one level quite serious. On the left-hand side, on the y-axis there, you've got increasing amount of irritation to you. And I mean that, at a gut level. That's important. You need to know yourself as a leader. And if you know that you cannot walk past something without it going right into the core of your stomach and upsetting you, then you can't ignore it, right? You're going to have to deal with that and deal with it fairly quickly. On the on the x-axis, you've got increasing barrier to school improvement. So the top right quadrant there is the thing that you probably need to deal with most urgently. Big barrier to school improvement and most annoying to you. Know yourself. You're not going to be able to look at anything else until you've dealt with that, because you know it's important and it annoys you. Just be human about it, accept it for what it is. Be careful of the things in the bottom right quadrant. Those things are just as important, but maybe at some level don't irritate you quite as much and maybe a bit blind to you, for sure. The things on the left-hand side, frankly, you're going to have to get over yourself a little bit because they're not as important. They need to wait. You need to have them in their right place. I actually do believe you can genuinely use that framework with a leadership team. It can be quite an entertaining thing to do, to see what irritates everyone most of all. And it does foster some honest conversations. Vic Goddard did a session about honest conversations, so check that out and see what's in there as well. But you know what? It was great. So use Vic's advice to help you with those honest conversations. But have a laugh with your leadership team doing that. But I tell you what, I think it will reveal some things that are quite honest as well. Sometimes when you laugh, you do get to honesty too. So there you go. That's the bonus extras that are will or will not put onto the YouTube version of this in due course. Take it or leave it. It's there for you. Take care. God bless.
Welcome back. Thank you so much, Joe. Just like any one of our topics, when I speak to any of the speakers and say this is a topic area and we discuss what needs, what they want to put in there, and then they ask me how long they've got and I say half an hour for their video, it's always that deer in headlights in terms of how do I cram so much into half an hour. But I think it really gets us to pull out. And I think Joe said to me, he goes, it really gets you to cherry pick and pull out the golden nuggets, to use all the cliches I possibly can, the essence of what the topic area is and how do you portray that within a half an hour presentation. And I'm glad there's some other voices in there as well, Joe and Kieran, who've also given their insight into what they've done and what their thoughts on this are. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Joe Richardson to the E-Stage, the final session of the week. Thank you, Joe, for putting that together, and welcome to the hashtag LDeduchat.
No worries, Alf. It's a privilege to do so.
No, it's been a journey, and I know how busy you are and how busy you've been. Obviously,
there's a few things going on, in fairness.
Pardon?
There's a few things going on, in fairness.
I think there are, just on a almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But and to find time to put this together and then also to be present today, I do appreciate that.
No worries.
Obviously, with the announcements yesterday and everybody trying to pull together in terms of what we need to do towards the end of this term and moving forward into the next academic year, it's a monumental task that we have ahead of us. But I think all of us are up for the challenge, I think, whatever comes next. Where do you want to start? I mean, we've got one question at the moment, and I know that you've answered a couple beforehand, and I've got some that have been posed online as well. So Jessica, do you want to start with Jessica's, which you said?
Yes, so Jessica was picking up on the issues around the pandemic, really. So her question was, what should schools do to improve academic achievements of pupils who have been more disadvantaged due to the coronavirus situation, and how can you fully comprehend what barriers they face and predict those that they will face? Okay, so 12 hours or whatever after Gavin Williamson's announcement of how schools are responding across the world, but I'm going to take you back to something that I said in the middle of that presentation, and that is to listen. And actually, I did some work with a group of community leaders, Black and ethnic minority community leaders within the Luton and Dunstable area recently, and the big message out of that was to listen. To create time within your curriculum, within your school day, and to enhance the opportunities to listen on a daily basis, because the nature of what children have experienced will be quite traumatic, right? For particularly where there's been bereavement and loss within their families, or just the sheer anxiety building up over a sustained period of time. And we'd be neglectful, really, to think that we can work all that out by, online surveys or, surveys to parents and so on and so forth. It's going to manifest itself in children's behaviours as they return over the next few weeks and months, indeed. Some things won't materialise for 12 months, for 18 months. That's just not the nature of child psychology and the way that children's brains develop. There's still a lot of development to be done. So my biggest thing is we've got a real watching brief to be had. And I would also say that we won't necessarily know right now who are the most disadvantaged, because it hasn't manifested yet. What I would say, because I'm relentlessly optimistic, is that having gone into some of our schools now and having listened to the head teachers, I had a meeting of a huge number of head teachers just on Wednesday. They're talking about children coming back really well, actually. That, I think the danger is maybe for a lot of people whose lockdown has been locked at home and they haven't had much opportunity to be in school with the children, what they're not seeing is actually the children coming back and being really happy to be back, not particularly anxious to be in school, actually, for a significant number of them. And actually the gaps are not as profound as we may think in some situations. So I think, quite rightly, we're very worried about those children who haven't had access to online learning, or their home situation is such that, home learning just hasn't been possible. And for sure, there's going to be gaps there. But what we have to do, to get to the nub of that question, is we actually have to look back, from March to September and ask ourselves some very fundamental questions. And that first question is, what have the children missed that they absolutely need to be able to go on with their next stage of their learning? And actually, when you strip that back and you look at the fundamental building blocks, it may not be quite as profound as we worry about. The Christchurch earthquake, I'm conscious there are people from all around the world on this sometimes, but the Christchurch earthquake that happened that resulted in lockdowns in schools in New Zealand, something remarkable happened in the schools in Christchurch area. That cohort of children actually performed better, despite their period of absence from school, than they did in previous years. So, I think we have to be really positive and really optimistic, because if I take you back to that example of Rosie, the little girl with Down syndrome, children are just the most fantastic resource in our school buildings, right? And they should give us the courage and the inspiration to be fiercely ambitious for them. I just don't think we should diminish that. So, coming back to that question, probably the biggest barrier might be our own anxiety, of what people have missed and their capacity to move on. Perhaps maybe being just that fiercely optimistic is my main suggestion.
It kind of latches on to this in terms of, and you discussed this with me when we spoke earlier on this week, in terms of the things that we take from the current situation to move forward. So Jessica also asked about the resilience issue, and I want to broaden that in terms of policies and structures that we have in our schools. So it's not just about our individual resilience as a member of staff or as a student that we need to look at within our schools, but what about the structures? Because I think when we have times of stress on our system, as we're going through at the moment, an immense stress that we've never felt before, how can we make our structures and policies more resilient, and how can we embed those within our practice moving forward? And perhaps what are those things?
Okay, I'm going to take you back to what Dan Connor said earlier in the week. So on Dan's column, he used that quote, and I read it in Alistair Campbell's book Winners, but it's not from Alistair Campbell, it's someone else used it, which is basically that culture eats strategy for breakfast. While I recognise that schools are going to be, in the next sort of week, 2 weeks in particular, they're going to be bellyaching really about structures, and they're going to be worried about policies and so on and so forth. That won't be what defines how well our schools return in the long term. it will 100% be about culture. So while I understand the question of it, and it is important that we, organise and get the balance between home learning and that resilience for a return to home learning, kind of more when rather than if that is required. It's not going to be so much about that, if I'm honest with you. The successful schools are going to be the ones that strike hard, strike early, and make some big bold steps in terms of filling the children full of confidence, both in terms of their well-being, but also in terms of, you haven't missed so much, right, that it's going to be a disaster. We can solve this, right? The challenges are certainly those children who are going into exam years next year, and I'm not sure Ofqual's consultation helps hugely at this moment in time. Aside from that, we just have to be fiercely ambitious around it and assume that the children are going to do brilliantly. I've been a real one-trick pony. I'll be really honest about it. I realise I'm sort of doing myself down as a leader here over the years, really. But in every school I've gone into, or every department I've gone into, I've kind of done the whole thing. I've sort of used that metaphor of an athlete jumping doing the high jump. No one, Jessica Ennis, when she started doing the high jump in part of the heptathlon, she didn't jump nearly 2 meters one day. She jumped 1 meter, then 1 meter 20, then and builds it up slowly over time. And actually, as a leader, part of the time, our job is to put the bar there and say, you actually can jump that, right? You can do that. Because if you start stating it and owning it a little bit, you give people the confidence around you. It becomes part of your narrative. That hang on a minute, this is something that. And the danger is that while we're talking quite rightly about anxiety and concerns and well-being and absolutely all those things that we need around counselling is fiercely important. One of the dangers is that we create a narrative that people just, that it has an energy that feeds itself sometimes, and it will get in the way of what's possible. So yeah, the policies are going to be really important. I have to redo risk assessments later on today. All those sort of things are going to be really important. But it's not, from my totally honest with you, policies are the thing that you fall back on sometimes. The baseline expectations. Culture is going to be important. What every head of department fiercely believes is possible for their own children. I'll just draw it back to, for everyone who's got, just picture someone in your mind's eye who you love very much, and what do you want for them? What do you really want for them? You want them to just be fully alive in all the sense that it's there. So if that's the case, that's what we must do for all of the children that we serve in our schools, right? It can't just be limited to our own children. It's that nature of service and that love for all that's got to permeate all the things that we're doing. So I'm going to keep banging that drum that yes, you've got to have great wellbeing services, great counselling services, support and supervision for staff who are encountering things and stories that are going to be really hard to digest. But if that's not allied to a sense of fierce hope and optimism, people's heads are going to drop. They're not going to be very positive about it. They're going to be worried about tomorrow all the time. Tomorrow brings great things, always. There you go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what came through in your presentation and right going all the way back to one of our earlier presentations with Mary Myatt, where she said, we are, the person in front of you, they are a human first.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a staff member second, or they're a human first and they're a learner second. So, and that's where the culture and the ethos, I suppose, comes from, is in terms of, and what you said about having those conversations, speaking to your team. And the most poignant picture was that one with the path, in terms of where people have formed their own path, but they knew where you all wanted to go to the same place. And I use the analogy of a wood. When you go walking in a wood and you have these paths marked out for you, but then you see all these offshoots, and the more often that somebody walks along them, the more visible that path becomes. It's actually having a confidence as a leader, perhaps, to enable and allow that to happen, because that's not always, and especially as leaders themselves will be in those stressful situations. I mean, what message would you send out in terms of to allow that culture where people can take their own path to get to the same destination that you've set?
Well, that's a great opportunity to bring back into what Michelle has posted there as a question as well. So coaching has got a really strong role to play in what goes on over the next few weeks and months, because again, I talked about listening carefully when you go into a school or when you go into a department. That's an important dimension. So we must listen also to our staff in our school communities and provide space for them to talk through what challenges they feel they have, explore the options that are going to be the most positive outcomes possible, and then select the ones that work best for themselves. So I'll direct people to Chris Nichols' session on coaching. Chris is an excellent person, and he's done the same program as I have done. And I absolutely fiercely believe that, you know, coaching is a tool that will really serve us well at this moment in time. Because the danger is, because of our lived experiences over the course of the last 4 months or so, that everyone is going to be coming to this in a very different place. And a one-size-fits-all policy, so to speak, or structural approach that you impose on things is not going to meet the need of any child or any member of staff, for that matter. So I think the role of people establishing coaching networks within their schools to enable them to meet the needs of their staffing community is really important, because that will draw out the culture, right? Providing you've always got someone like Rosie in your mind's eye.
Yeah, absolutely. And just from a practical point of view, in terms of when we're looking at the students that are the most vulnerable, that perhaps haven't had access to the online learning, or they've had broadband that hasn't allowed them, so just from a technical point of view, but what that's actually resulted in is that they fall, the gap, that gap has broadened. It must have broadened for those students compared, relatively speaking, to others. And if we're doing, like you said, online surveys and all the rest of it, their voices may not be as heard as some that are able to engage in that process online, because they've got those issues. So how do we ensure, so not the whole cohort, and I completely get the fact that we need to enter into this new normal with the highest possible optimism level dialed up to number 11 as we can, because what else is there? The alternative isn't what we want to do that, but there will be those groups of students and parents that have not been able to engage in that process in the same way, and the new plans or the way that you're moving forward, that voice may not have been accounted for. So what would you say to leaders regarding that?
Look, I think that the easiest mistake for us all to have made, and I think that probably we will all have made it to one level or another, is that we send out a survey to children who have no IT to find out how they're getting on with their IT. You know, there's a certain irony in all of that, and I've seen that writ large in lots of schools that I know of. I'm totally sure it's not true of my trust schools, but you know, I've seen it writ large, and you even see it from the government's perspective as well, don't you? And we know that there is that kernel of students where their experience is going to have been very, very poor indeed. So we've got to meet that structural challenge going forward from September through to the end of next year. If we get ourselves in a situation where we have another lockdown, for example, my personal view is, you know, and I shared this with one of my head teachers recently when we looked at the impact of their pastoral review days they had. They identified a group of vulnerable learners, not vulnerable children in terms of EHCP plans or disadvantaged students necessarily, or social care students, but specifically vulnerable students, those who are struggling to engage at home in any way, shape or form. That cohort of students may well need more face-to-face teaching in future lockdowns than maybe schools have provided up to now. And it probably will still be very limited, right? But hopefully what the lockdown has demonstrated is that, you know, we can manage infection rates and we can manage the protocols in school if we are in a position where, you know, we can keep students appropriately socially isolated. So there is something there about learning from our last lockdown experience to the future one. The other thing is, and I'll come back to it, so it's year 13 and year 11 next year, right? Those are the big challenges. For everyone else, we mustn't see the recovery time or the reset and reconnect time that we're in now as anything more than part of a much longer journey. And in fairness to Gavin Williamson, he did say that a while back. There is a danger that we get back in September and everyone goes, you know, for our coming into year 5 students or our coming into year 3 students, everyone says, oh crikey, they're miles behind. Yeah, but we've got time, right? We really have got time to get this right. So let's not have our own anxiety cascaded down to the students because we're fretting about, you know, how much they've missed in the last few months or so. You know, our children nowadays will live about 100 years old, right? So 1 year is 1% of that. Their lockdown so far is probably going to be about 1/4 of 1% of their entire lives. And please God, that's it. Please God, we can get back to some kind of managed normality going forward, and we're able to be, sort of relentlessly positive about it. But the danger is that we say, we've missed this time, we need to catch it all up in 5 minutes flat. That's bonkers, right? We can't do that, and we're going to have unintended consequences by putting too much pressure on the children as a result. I actually think that, the primary schools in our trust have totally talked about the first half term just being about listening, reflecting, understanding where the children are at, teaching broadly the normal curriculum, starting the new year in a normal way, assuming they would be able to catch up, but without necessarily doing huge amounts differently to what they would normally do. If we're going to have a new normal, we need to be normal, right? It's got to be normal. The hint's in the word.
And also, I think people are craving for familiarity as well. So that goes hand in hand with that, in terms of if we make too many changes, what we've been craving to go back to, and that doesn't exist in any shape or form, there will be a further disconnect as well, and a further readjustment needed. So I think you're right in terms of keeping structures in place and moving forward. I think we've got time just for perhaps one more question. Should we have a look at that question? I think it's more on the practicalities as well. Eileen asked that question.
About time.
Yeah,
about creating time. So the question is, how strong do you believe in creating time for your staff to look at evidence-based practice to help inform decisions, e.g. non-contact time? Well, look, 100% I believe in time, but what I also believe in is the power of collaboration to be able to achieve far more together than what we can do independently. So if schools can actually look at the nature of the challenges that are emerging within their community and set up working groups or research parties in order to look at in those pieces individually, and where schools are part of wider collaboratives, whether that's in academy trusts or in groups and softer collaborations to do something similar, you can break the back of some of that for sure. It's interesting that there's that look at evidence-based practice. So we're, for the first time, since the Spanish flu, we are in the breadth of a pandemic. There is no evidence-based practice to look back on at the moment. So how do you recover from a pandemic? Our most recent example is the Spanish flu, and I don't necessarily think that is particularly transferable. So we're going to have to create the evidence base through this first phase of the pandemic, listen, reflect, and also not be too harsh on ourselves. And I really mean that. You probably got the sense of who I am through the presentation. We mustn't be too harsh on ourselves for the mistakes that we will inevitably have made. It's really easy, isn't it, to look back and say, we did this wrong. Well, if we did it wrong, but we did it with a good heart, then do you know what? We did our best in the moment, and we should just forgive ourselves for that and do it better next time. So I don't believe that necessarily there's going to be a huge amount of evidence-based specific to the pandemic. What there will be is a lot of work to be done around trauma, around bereavement, and around support services there. And schools would do really well to think about the support networks that they've got, not just for the children in their school, but also for the staff who are encountering, that sad, sullen child who was bright and chirpy and now isn't. Actually, that is really affecting. I've encountered a few children who were really bouncy prior to lockdown, and the lights have gone out a bit, and that's going to be hard for us as staff to take, because we love the children, right? I don't mean that in sort of romantic way, but we love the children, sincerely love them, and it's really important that we give ourselves space and time, and the time that Eileen's talking about there. I think the biggest time we need is just a bit of sort of debrief time and supervision time to offload some of the things that are gonna come through.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point to finish with, to be fair. And I'm going to round off with Michelle's comment. Thank you, Joe, for your infectious positivity.
Oh, there you
And I think that came through all the way through that presentation. I mean, the topic is school improvement. Yeah, that could be anything. But in terms of in the context that we're in at the moment and the things that you discussed, I think absolutely what's needed. And I think setting that bar high, not necessarily just on attainment, but on terms of our own outlook, especially if you're in a leadership position, it will have an impact, a positive impact on the team and the students around you. So I thank you for that. Even if it was just that, I thank you for that, because I think we need that as more and more information comes out about how we're going to be moving forward. So thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Richard. Before I go, can I just say on behalf of everyone that's been involved in this, both presenters and also the hundreds of people that have engaged in this over the last few weeks or so, a massive thank you to you, to Claire, and to turns out someone else in your house who does all the editing now that that's been out, and also to Sufyan and to Adrian and the team at Chiltern Learning Trust. It's been a privilege to be part of this, and if you haven't caught up with some of the other sessions, go onto YouTube. They're all awesome, fantastic.
I really appreciate that, Joe. And as I said to all of my speakers, this would be nothing without the speakers and the attendees. So we're literally just the platform that allows those people to connect with each other. So, but I thank you for those comments.
No
I
worries.
really do appreciate it. I almost had a small tear in my eye when I looked at how many sessions I've got left. As much as getting up every morning and doing this is not a challenge, but sometimes you do need to have a break. But I know that when it hits July the 17th, it will be a sad moment because I have enjoyed it, and I've loved meeting all the speakers like yourself that I wouldn't have normally been able to connect with in the old normal.
This is the new normal. Let's go for it.
Absolutely, in collaboration, like you said. So thank you so much. We have got a fantastic week lined up for you moving forward. Next week, we have starting off on Monday, we have Leadership Matters. We've got Andy Buck. On Tuesday, we have somebody who I've been working with the last couple of years. It's Gamal Yafai, does a lot of diversity, inclusion, belonging, training with me on my program of BAME into Leadership, which I run as a DFE funded program within the local area here. He'll be looking at inclusive leadership. Why should anybody be led by you? And then on Wednesday, we have Anita Davey, who will be looking at SEND, an outstanding provision. Thursday, we have supporting recovery and resilience and development. That's another new session that we've added in. We've got Sabrina Francis, who ran a session at the Cholney Girls' School, and it was such a fantastic session. And she was so up for doing a session with us that we thought we'd actually put that in amongst our lineup. We had a morning free, and she was added to that later on in the program. And then on Friday, we round off the week with maximising progress in the history classroom with the brilliant Tom Rogers from Rogers History. If you've seen him online on Twitter, fantastic set of resources looking at how we can make history come alive and improve progress. So that's the week we have ahead for you. And we have, I think, 9 sessions left of this current series. And do go over onto YouTube and subscribe with us. That's going to be the way, to be fair, moving forward as we start returning back to school, that you'll be able to find our content and be able to share our content and rewatch it. This is me, another week, #LDeduchat, Leadership Development and Education Online. I shall see you next week, and have a safe and good weekend. Thank you.